Jack Smith's Deposition, Part 2. The questions begin. So today I'm going to read you a small portion of the question and answer that went on in the deposition of Jack Smith. The reason why I'm doing this is because I want to be able to have this information spread throughout America and America be reminded again 5 years after Donald Trump incited an insurrection and conspired to upend our constitutional order. We need to be reminded what Donald Trump did. And this sworn testimony by Jack Smith gives us an eye-widening reminder of what happened. Jack Smith says, if we went to trial, we would prevail. On the concern of the phone numbers that were subpoenaed, Jack Smith says House's position is that getting those records violated the speech or debate clause. Is that something that you disagree with? That is the question that's presented. And Jack Smith says, yes, he disagrees with the proposition that the House members' telephone records were protected by the speech or debate clause. The speech or debate clause is about It focuses on the content of the matter, not simply the fact that legislatures were calling other people. It is about what is being said and whether it is part of a legislative process or not. If it is part of a legislative process, then the speech or debate clause provides members of Congress with a carte blanche immunity. But talking to the president about elections is not part of legislative duties. In fact, it is explicitly not part of the president's duties to be anywhere near elections. So to talk to the president about election matters at the time of the certification of the 2020 election is something that is not a legislative process. And therefore it is not covered by the speech or debate clause. Jack Smith says, I was asked whether he was in any way shaped by, repeatedly asked if he was in any way shaped by political consideration and whether he had any preconceived ideas of his position in this case. And he said that no, I did not have a preconceived outcome in mind when I took this job. He looked at the facts and the law. There's then the question about the infringement on the First Amendment regarding the statements that Donald Trump made. Smith says, fraud is not protected by the First Amendment. It is important to make that clear in the indictment. Then the questionnaire says, but the president's statements that he believed the election was rife with fraud, those certainly are statements that are protected by the First Amendment, correct? Jack Smith says, absolutely not. If they are made to target a lawful government function and they are made with knowing falsity. No, they are not. That was my point about fraud not being protected by the First Amendment. There is no historical analog for what President Trump did in this case. He was free to say that he thought he won the election. He was even free to say falsely that he won the election. But what he was not free to do is violate federal law and use knowingly false statements about election fraud to target a lawful government function. That he was not allowed to do. That differentiates this case from any past cases. One of the strengths of our case is our witnesses were not going to be political enemies. They were going to be political allies. Numerous say they voted for President Trump and wanted him to win. Our case was built on Republicans who put their allegiance to the country before the party. And so Trump got information from people he trusted on other issues. He rejected it whenever it didn't fit his staying in office. There was a pattern. Very consciously did not try to reach out to the sort of people who would have the most expertise on these issues. He reached out to people who he thought could back him up. Donald was preying on the party allegiance of people who supported him. The question comes, why didn't you charge the co-conspirators? And Jack Smith says because the office was closed down because Donald Trump had won before Jack Smith could make the final determination. Then he's asked the question about the political affiliations again and about helping out the Democratic president and that sort of political spin about keeping him off the campaign trail. And Jack Smith says, false. I'll say a few things. First is the evidence here made clear that President Trump was by a large measure the most culpable and most responsible person in this conspiracy. These crimes were committed for his benefit. The attack that happened at the Capitol does not happen without him. The other co-conspirators were doing this for his benefit. So in terms of why he would pursue a case against him, I entirely disagree with any characterization that our work was in any way to hamper the presidential election. I would never take orders from a political leader to hamper another person in an election. That's not who I am. People who know me in my experience over 30 years would find that laughable. Then the question comes, did you develop evidence that Donald was responsible for the violence at the Capitol on January 6th? Jack Smith says, our view of the evidence was that he caused it and that he exploited it and that it was foreseeable to him. He, in the weeks leading up to January 6th, created a level of distrust. He used that level of distrust to get people to believe fraud claims that weren't true. He made false statements to state legislatures, his supporters, in all sorts of contexts, and was aware in the days leading up to January 6th that his supporters were angry when he invited them and then directed them to the Capitol. Once they were at the Capitol and once the attack on the Capitol happened, he refused to stop it. He instead issued a tweet that, without question in my mind, endangered the life of his own vice president. And when the violence was going on, he had to be pushed repeatedly by his staff members to do anything to quell it. And even afterwards, he directed co-conspirators to make calls to members of Congress. People were his political allies to further delay the proceedings. So that is a very strong reminder of what Donald Trump was doing on January 6th, before January 6th, and even after the attack on the Capitol. In the next episodes, I will continue with briefing you on the questions that are asked by the House committee and Jack Smith's answers. Why? Because I think every American needs to be reminded of what Donald Trump did. And we should welcome this information as a reminder of the attack on our democracy. And we should never, ever forget it or let any disinformation change the facts about it. I hope that this sort of revision or retelling, not revision, this sort of retelling happens on a 5-year basis, every 5 years, because we need a reminder. We need reminding of what Donald Trump is. That's his legacy. His attack on American democracy is centerpiece of Donald Trump's legacy. And we can never let anybody forget it. With that said, thank you so much for listening. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Do share this information because people need to remember it. People need to have it as part of their muscle memory. Thank you so much for listening. Talk to you soon.